I just finished watching Gladiator 2, and the biggest problem with this movie is that the original exists. Let's talk about it. What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here, and as I do with all my movie reviews, I'm gonna give you a little bit of information about Gladiator 2, who made it, what it's about, all that good stuff. Then I'm gonna go into my expectations, as well as the things I did and did not like about the movie. And finally, I'll let you know who I think Gladiator 2 is for, if anyone. If that kind of thing sounds cool to you and you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies coming out, make sure you subscribe. All right, so Gladiator 2 is, of course, the long-awaited sequel to the original Gladiator movie that came out almost 25 years ago. And just like the original, this one is directed by the legendary Ridley Scott. You know him from doing a bunch of amazing movies, including, of course, the original Gladiator, the Aliens franchise, and I mean, just a ton of other movies, especially movies that are done on a really grand scale. He's known to be a very big director when it comes to that kind of thing. And in this movie, we follow Lucius, who is the son of Maximus Decimus Meridius from the first Gladiator movie, as he is kind of swept up into what's going on in Rome at the time and ends up fighting in the Colosseum himself. So this is definitely a sequel to the original. It follows that movie. It takes place around, I believe, 16 years after the first, and it has an absolutely insane cast. They're bringing back a few people from the original movie all these years later, especially Connie Nielsen, who played Lucius's mother in the first movie and kind of the love interest of Russell Crowe. She makes a return all these years later. But then you have a bunch of new people that are joining as well, specifically Paul Mescal, who plays Lucius. You also have Pedro Pascal, who plays kind of this general and current love interest of Lucius's mother. Denzel Washington is in this movie, as well as a few others. Joseph Quinn's a big standout. He was in the Quiet Place sequel. I forget, Quiet Place Day One. I saw him in that, and he was very good in it. So yeah, overall, a pretty awesome cast and a really capable director. But does that make for a good movie? Well, that's what we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. First, I'll kind of tell you my expectations going into this. For me, I love the original Gladiator movie. I saw that way back in the day, I think when it first came out, or maybe when it came out on TV. I would have probably been a little too young to see it in theaters, but I think it is a phenomenal movie. It is an epic sword and sandals kind of adventure, kind of this like history based, but not real history. You know, they like to take some liberties with the stories that they tell, and that's totally cool. It makes for a better movie, and this isn't a documentary or anything like that. But yeah, I really love the original movie. I think Russell Crowe was phenomenal in that movie, and that really set him up kind of for the rest of his career. And that being said, I don't think that, or at least I didn't think going into this movie that we needed a sequel. I mean, that movie, if you haven't seen it, it ends pretty clearly. Like, there is a very distinct conclusion to that story, and it's over. And so in my mind, coming into this movie, I was a little worried. I didn't think we needed a sequel. I thought that if we were going to do a sequel, maybe we could do something that is many, many years later that doesn't involve any of the characters from the original movie. But here we are. It's 16 years later. It involves Russell Crowe's direct descendant. So what were some of the things that I liked about this movie? And there's definitely a few things. You can really tell that they spent a lot of money on this movie. A lot of the locations that they shot on and the kind of structures that they built, I think were done really, really well. It's a very pretty movie to look at, and there's a lot to appreciate visually. You know, Ridley Scott is a very visual director as well, and there are a number of moments in this movie where they utilize kind of artistic liberties. Like, there's a moment at the very beginning, it's kind of like the opening credits sequence, and they use watercolor, or it appears like watercolor in that. Then there are also some black and white moments throughout the movie. It's definitely visually appealing. Also, of course, as you would expect from a movie about a gladiator, the fight sequences are amazing. There is these hand-to-hand combat moments throughout the movie that Paul Mescal, I think, pulls off really impressively, but also just some grander scale military battle type situations. The movie actually opens with kind of this military force moving in on a kind of native population and like a fortress that they have set up. And there's a really cool battle sequence there and a few others throughout the movie that I thought were really well done. Aside from that, I think that a lot of the actors and actresses in it were really good. Paul Mescal, I feel like, did a really good job for the most part. We'll get into some of the things that I think didn't work with him when we get to the cons later on. But overall, I think that he's a very emotionally compelling actor. And so he really kind of brings you along with him on this journey, and you feel for him and you want to see him do well. Really though, the massive standout in this movie as far as acting is concerned is Denzel Washington. And of course, surprise, surprise, Denzel's a phenomenal actor, but I mean, he steals the show. I know the movie's called Gladiator and it's supposed to be about Paul Mescal, but I was more interested in Denzel's story and his origin and where he came from and his machinations and the things that he was trying to accomplish. And I don't want to spoil any of that, but there's so much to get there, and there's so much under the surface that maybe they don't explore fully that I was really interested in. And I think Denzel is most likely going to get a supporting actor nomination at the Oscars. I could definitely see that happening. Also, much like the original, they reuse a lot of the musical score in this one, and that once again works. I mean, good music is good music, and it works really well in this story. It helps kind of bring up the emotion of the scenes and to make you feel like you're involved in a part of this whole world. So I think the music is another thing that really stood out for me. Aside from that, though, if I'm being honest, a lot of the things that stood out with this movie were middling, if not negative. So let's go ahead and get into my cons real quick and buckle in because we got a few things to go over here. First up, the elephant in the room is that this movie is so derivative of the original. It is almost beat for beat exactly the same, from the way that the first movie kicks off. And I don't want to spoil anything, but almost exactly what happens to Russell Crowe's character in the first movie happens to Paul Mescal's character in this movie, in the way that they get the movie going. The what do they call it? The inciting moment, the thing that sparks off the rest of the story. It's very, very similar. Then with some of the people that he meets along the way, there are almost mirror images of characters from the original movie. There are plot points, major plot points for the movie that are exactly what certain characters were trying to accomplish in the first one. Other characters are also trying to accomplish almost the exact same thing in this movie. It truly is like a mirror of the other, except unlike a mirror, this is maybe more like a mirror that, you know how the mirror in your bathroom sink gets like water splashed on it and maybe like toothpaste or whatever. And so sometimes you got to like wipe it down, get it nice and clean so that way you can see your reflection really clear. That's what this movie is. This movie is like a smudgy mirror in that it's almost the same as the first one, except it's a little grimy. There's a little schmutz on it that you got to clean off in order to kind of have it equal out to the first movie. There we go. Gladiator 2, a schmutzy mirror. But yeah, there are entire plot points that are lifted right out of the first one. Paul Mescal, as much as I think that he's a very good actor, in this movie, he is a poor man's Russell Crowe, and no one can do it quite like Russell Crowe did it in that first movie. So it does come up short. Also, kind of alongside with that character arc, there are moments in this movie where, just like in the first one, Paul Mescal has to kind of rally the troops, the other gladiators, and get them to be on his side and to follow him into battle. And they don't set that up well enough in this movie. There are moments where he's kind of rallying the troops and they're all getting behind him, but you don't really understand why. Like, why are they following this man? There wasn't really anything that led you as the viewer to perceive that he is worth following. Like, yeah, he's a capable fighter and all that, but in the first movie with Russell Crowe, there is a very specific encounter that they have, the gladiators have with him, that makes it clear that, oh, he is one to follow and he knows what's going on and he's going to help get us through this. And that just doesn't exist in this movie, at least not nearly to the same degree as it did in the first. Also, there are some decisions that are made by certain characters. As I mentioned, Denzel is a real strong point in this movie, but even his character, despite all of the what I think were very interesting choices that he made, there are some at the very end of the movie, the way the movie kind of wraps up, where you're just kind of left thinking, why did you do that? Like, are you doing that just to kind of conclude the movie? Because it really feels like that was illogical. Like, that isn't a decision that your character would make. And so it kind of breaks the illusion of what they had going on with these characters. Again, I'm like dancing around this because I don't want to spoil anything for you, but it was a bit of a letdown. Also, just as kind of a nitpick, there were a few scenes that they did what's called day for night. And if you're not familiar with filmmaking, that's basically when you shoot a scene in the daytime because you have your actors and your crew available during the day, but then you essentially kind of apply a filter to it to make it look like it's nighttime instead of daytime when you actually show the footage. And it's never good looking. Like, it always looks clearly off a little bit. Everything kind of has a blue hue to it, and I could definitely tell that several times in this movie, which to me is just odd. When you have a movie that has a $250 to $300 million budget, you can't afford to just shoot these scenes at nighttime. I didn't understand that, but it felt strange. I don't know if it was a creative choice, but if it was a creative choice, I think that was a poor one. But I don't know. I mean, I'm just a dude in his spare bedroom talking about movies, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to that. Maybe Ridley Scott made that choice for a reason. But overall, I do think Gladiator 2 is a good movie. It's just because it is a sequel to that great film, one of the greatest, sword and sandal adventure movies of all time. It just has a lot to live up to, and it can't, and it doesn't live up to it. So who do I think Gladiator 2 is for? Well, if you are a big fan of the original, I think that there's still a lot to enjoy from this movie. Do not expect it to be anywhere near as good as the original. Keep those expectations in check. But overall, I had a good time watching it. Like I said, some of the action sequences were really cool. There's a scene in the Colosseum where they flood the Colosseum and they have like a mock naval battle, which apparently is historically accurate. And there's all these really cool things that they do visually and with the action. And it's just kind of cool to see where some of the characters from the first movie ended up in the long run. So if you are a fan of that original movie, I think that there's enough to enjoy here to warrant going to see this in theaters. Also, because it is such a visual spectacle, you have to see it in like the biggest possible screen that you can. If it's available in IMAX near you, watch it in IMAX. Aside from that, if this isn't really your bag, if you're not big into these kinds of movies, thankfully, there's plenty of other movies to see in theaters this weekend. I actually just did a review of Wicked, which I was very surprised by. So if you want to check out that review, I will link that right over here for you to jump into next. Otherwise, let me know what you thought about Gladiator 2 in the comments below, and I'll catch you next time. Be good.